Good afternoon. Welcome to the Delta Stewardship Council's August meeting at Big Break Visitor Center at the Delta. We welcome those of you who have joined us in person. We welcome those of you who are observing on the webcast. We will begin with the roll call, starting on my left.
Dammer here. Eisenberg here.
Fiorini here.
Asia Brown here. Natalia here.
Johnson here.
We have a quorum. Everyone is present, including our newest council member, Mayor Asia Brown. Welcome.
Thank you so very much.
Mayor Brown was recently appointed by Speaker Atkins. She is the mayor of the city of Compton, and we're with a very distinguished land use planning record and education. So we look forward to you bringing to bear your skills and talents to the work of the Stewardship Council.
Absolutely. I believe the council is critical work to the future of California, so I'm honored to be here.
Additionally, let's see.
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
are you going to announce how she was sworn in here?
Why don't you?
Well, we were all riding in the van over to the display, and the chair just turned around and started saying, "We want to do an oath." And I said, "Sure." So in the van, it was great. It was great.
Yeah, in the Delta, at the dunes. So we believe in efficiency, using every available moment for the highest and best use. Is Cody here?
Yes.
Cody, there you are. Great to have you with us. Cody Phillips is our newest legal intern. Cody is a product of the Paso Robles area, undergraduate work at Berkeley, law school at Tulane, and has recently joined us, and we welcome you, Cody. Thank you. Additionally, we're privileged to have Robert Doyle, who is the director of the East Bay Parks, of which the Big Break Visitor Center is a part of. And Bob, if you would come to the microphone, and welcome to say a few words. Thank you for allowing us to use this beautiful facility.
Robert Doyle, General Manager, East Bay Regional Park District. We have a 2-county special district in the state of California. We are the largest regional park agency in the United States. Mm-hmm. And this is our 80th birthday. So we started in the heart of the Depression, and residents in the East Bay said, we want to have some parks. So we praise them and glorify them as that brilliant vision. So welcome to a very exciting place for the East Bay Regional Park District, and particularly the East Bay of Contra Costa, the Delta. And this is a concept that we have had for 22 years. We actually, this was about a $14–15 million investment. We're doing the last phases right now of the investment, which is the really kind of modern technology displays. We really wanted to have it very relevant to school kids, not so many static displays, although we have some of that great artwork here. But we really want it to be interactive. So it was a very high priority of my board to get a really great opportunity, which has really 3 elements. It has the Delta itself outdoors and the interpretive programs there, including the great map, which I hope you've all seen, of the entire Delta to scale. We have the element of school science, which is in the back room there. And then we have the displays for the general public as well. But the exciting thing for the East Bay Regional Park District here is that this has been so embraced by Eastern Contra Costa County, the schools, other agencies. Everybody likes to have their meeting here. And that's what it's about. It's about talking about the Delta, talking about, Margot Patterson-Doss said, there's no there in the Delta. And when she was trying to do a guide of the Delta years ago. And so we're really trying to make a there so people have a place for discussion, for education, and for science. And I think that's something we're extremely proud of. It took us a long time. And the thing I really want to mention is we didn't get $14 million in a chunk and buy this. We got funding in pieces. We got a state park bond that did the Discovery Center out near the point. We got the Wildlife Conservation Board to do the pier, the access pier into the water. And then we got additional grants and our own funding to do the building itself. This is a building that actually can be expanded. It is very energy efficient. And so we actually copied this from the national parks, which has their center in San Francisco at Crissy Field, is the same type of building. So it was fairly economical to do this, but also allows us to expand in the future should we have additional funding. But what's really great is the staff that's here serving East County and the Delta area, and I want to introduce our supervising naturalist. And Mike Moran is here, and he'll give you a little bit about what's going on as far as numbers, and it's pretty exciting. So Mike, please come up.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mike Moran, the supervising naturalist for Big Break Visitor Center at the Delta. Thank you all for coming. And this is a lovely center, I must admit, and we're very happy and proud of it. But I do encourage everybody to get outside and see the reason for our existence, and that is the great access that tells the story of the Delta right here at Big Break. So everything you hear about in the Delta, and I'm sure you've heard all about it at your meetings and everywhere else, those stories are all being told right out here. And we've been really lucky, very graced with the public that has come out and helped us fill up our numbers to about twice what we thought we would get. Our first year we anticipated about 10,000 visitors, and we got 10,000 by the time May rolled around. Ended up with over 20,000 people visiting last year, and we're on pace to surpass that by a pretty big amount this year. School groups, high school groups, continuing education, college groups, meetings, the general public, pretty much the entire gamut. And our idea is to get people out here excited, learned, informed, but also become stewards of the Delta. And that's our big key, is to put this in the forefront of people's minds, so that they are that informed electorate, the informed public that stewards this place into the future. And luckily for us, we've had a lot of great success with people coming in to visit. And that's mostly due to our staff. Kevin Damstra, our naturalist and docent coordinator. Jamie Rosati is our senior office assistant. You've met some of our student aides, interpretive student aides here that are invaluable in our programming. David Golden, and we had Deanna Michelli as well. And we have quite a cadre of volunteer docents. So we have a lot of community buy-in, a lot of folks coming in, and we're only looking to a brighter future. And we thank you folks for coming and invite you to come on back on a more social opportunity or scale. Anytime you come by and let us know, we're happy to show you around.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mike.
So what I'd like you to take away from your visit here today is that there are gigantic challenges in government. There are gigantic challenges with the Delta, and occasionally the Delta issues are even controversial. I don't know if you've heard that. But the money sometimes is really overwhelming trying to pull things together. And when we talked about building a visitor center here, the money wasn't available. And I think we partnered with so many people to create this. This is not a park district creation on its own. It was a partnership with the community and with a lot of state and federal agencies for grants. So I encourage, as we think about the Delta and restoration and water and all the debates there, and when Commissioner Johnson first started talking about the Delta and defining the Delta and looking at those issues, I remember those discussions. And it just is going to take a cooperative effort and to kind of creatively piece little pieces of dollars together to do something grand. And we think we've done something grand here, and we think we're educating future generations about where their water comes from and where their wildlife is impacted positively and negatively, and have an educated young workforce. Michael mentioned the internship staff. The East Bay Regional Park District is one of the largest employers of kids in the summer in the entire East Bay. We employ, one way or another, over 300 kids in the summer. Some of those are college kids, some of those are summer high school kids working in parks, lifeguards, educators. And so we believe that's an important role for our agency, is to get kids to relate to what's outside, not just inside, but also to engage in that debate, to engage in that thinking about how do we solve problems and move California forward. So thank you for being here, and you've got a lot of work to do, I know, and occasionally a few controversies, and we'll let you have those. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you for the fine work that you do and the successes that you're achieving, and in particular, the work here. It's important for the Stewardship Council to see firsthand activities in the Delta. That's the reason why we are here. And I'll use that as a segue to my chair's report, file item 3. For those of you that are following on the webcast, our meeting unofficially began this morning with visits from council member, the City of Oakley, Diane Burgess, District 3, Contra Costa County Supervisor Mary Pifo, that gave us a brief welcoming and explanation of some of the activities that are currently underway in the Delta, in the eastern Contra Costa County portion. John Kupchak provided a very thorough briefing of the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservancy, and that served as a launching point for then going out into the field, where we visited the Antioch Dunes. Louis Terrazas with the Fish and Wildlife gave us a tour of the dunes restoration and a native plants restoration project. We then went on to Dutch Slough, where we visited a habitat restoration project that the Department of Water Resources has underway. Patty Finfrock gave us a briefing from the department. Kenneth Strelo from the City of Oakley, the senior planner, talked about the City of Oakley's interface with this very large restoration project. And from American Rivers talked about how the project initially was conceived, and so all of that was useful in informing the Delta Stewardship Council about one of the meaningful habitat restoration projects that have been underway. In February of 2011, Phil and I co-chaired an early actions committee, and the Dutch Slough project was one of those early actions projects that we approved. So it's good to see the place that we've read about and seen pictures of. For this last month, obviously there has been a lot of activity in the legislature. We've been following the development and ultimate signing of a water bond. Currently, there is historic groundwater legislation that may have been approved in the legislature by now. If not, it's very near reaching the point where the Senate and the Assembly will be voting on that. Along the lines of the other major activity for me personally has been interacting with multiple agencies in preparation for our next Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee meeting that's scheduled for November 17th. A lot of work is underway at the staff level in developing an agenda for a meaningful meeting in November, and I've had the opportunity to participate in several meetings with agency directors and so on. And finally, and most recently, a very unique opportunity was presented to myself and a few others from California. The state of Idaho has been dealing with a conflict for 30 years that recently came to a successful conclusion. It was the adjudication of 156,000 surface and groundwater claims. It involved state and federal agencies, local stakeholders, tribes, and we were invited to attend the signing ceremony of this, the conclusion of this 30-year process, as a way of learning lessons about conflict management. Certainly in the role of the Delta Stewardship Council, we coordinate, we synthesize, but we also recognize that there are conflicts, and to the degree that we can learn how others have successfully managed conflict unto successful resolutions, we're happy to learn. And if we have to go out of state to learn that is a time and travel well spent, I believe. So that concludes my remarks, unless anybody has any questions. Oh, I will be preparing a written report. It's not enough to go and learn lessons and then to move on. So have taken the responsibility to develop a written report, and will circulate it with my colleagues for factual checks, and hopefully in the next few weeks I'll have something to distribute to the council and post on our website. So with that, we'll move on to file item number 4, Executive Officer Jessica Pearson.
Thank you, Randy. And I wanted to begin by issuing a special recognition to staff who helped make today's tour and meeting possible, particularly to Jessica Davenport, who was our tour guide this morning, and to Eric Alvarez and Daniel Wang, who drove the tour buses, Pat and Angela, who helped arrange pretty much all the logistics and provided people with lunch, and then also to Keith Coolidge, who's not here today. But these things don't happen on their own. They take a lot of staff work, and I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that. So on today's agenda, what we're going to be focusing on is that you will hear an update on our levee investment strategy work. Staff and consultants have been busy laying the foundation for the project, and today you're going to hear primarily about progress that's been made regarding our approach to ensuring the use of best available science in the project. So that includes the establishment of an independent review panel, and Cindy Messer will be reporting on this later this afternoon. Also, this morning you got a good overview in the field of some of the challenges and opportunities facing restoration efforts in the Delta. This afternoon we're going to drill down a little deeper and focus in on some of those that we have evaluated as staff and that we've been working with multiple agencies to put forth into our latest issue paper. And then Jessica Davenport is going to be presenting on that, as well as Lauren Hastings on our science staff. As always, I like to provide just a quick overview of some of the staff activities related to implementation of the Delta Plan, and also to highlight notable events that have occurred in the past month. This week, staff held a public workshop in Clarksburg on Delta Plan implementation. Specifically, the workshop focused on educating members of the public about our covered actions process and how and when they can become involved in that process, as well as how our appeals process works. As you know, enforcement of our regulations depends in large part on our appellate authority. And in order to have it work, we need people to understand how they can access those correct forms, information on our website, etc. So this was our third covered action workshop in recent months. The first two targeted local agencies, including Delta reclamation districts, who may need to file their own consistency determinations with the council. And about 20 people were in attendance in this workshop. So internally, on the administration front at the Delta Stewardship Council, we're currently in the various stages of recruitment process for 12 positions at the council that I've been reporting on to you. These are primarily new positions authorized by the recent budget that took effect July 1st. And the positions are primarily, but not exclusively, in our science division. I'm happy to announce we made 2 recent hires. Dorothy Takahashi, who has a BS in chemistry from Sacramento State, an associate's degree in network administration and design, comes to us from the California Emergency Medical Services Authority, where she served as an information security officer. She will be our chief information officer at the council. Anthony Navasero has a BS in civil engineering from San Jose State. He has experience working as an engineer for a few land development companies, for private developers, and for public agencies for over 10 years. His public career began a few years ago with the Department of Water Resources as a staff water resources engineer. He has experience in flood preparedness, specifically working in the Delta, and that will be a real asset to the work that we're doing on Delta levees. His main focus at the council, however, will be on Delta Plan implementation issues related to water management. So he'll be reporting to Dustin Jones, who reports to Cindy Messer in our planning division. Neither of them are here today, but you will probably be interacting with them over the course of the next few months. Quick update on the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. State officials announced yesterday that revisions will be made to the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. The scope of those revisions has not yet been released. They mentioned details would be forthcoming in 6 to 8 weeks. They indicated that it's in response to comments that they've been reviewing, including our own comments, and also their own additional work that may be leading to changes in design and other aspects of the project. They did not indicate a specific date, but they said that in early 2015, they will issue a revised plan and a revised draft EIR for additional public review. So of course, we will be repositioning staff and allocating time as the time draws near so that we can review those revisions. Randy mentioned a water bond. That's something that we've been reporting on monthly for some time now. Earlier this month, a water bond was passed by nearly unanimous bipartisan vote in the state legislature for the amount of $7.5 billion. The governor signed it, and it will appear on the November 4th ballot as Proposition 1. I just wanted to highlight some of the notable aspects of the bond as it relates to the work of the Delta Stewardship Council. There are some of the same aspects in the bond, many of the same chapters, for example, and structures and funding categories as the 2009 bond. And the new bond underscores many of the same requirements as our own Delta plan and puts that in terms of eligibility language for funding. For example, ag water management plans are required where applicable for some of the funding in the new water bond, urban water management plans, so that's similar to requirements that we have currently in the Delta plan. Compliance with the 2009 Water Conservation Act, also known as 20% by 2020, is a prerequisite for applying for or for qualifying for money under the new water bond should it pass. There's also funding, about $100 million, for groundwater management plans, which is the subject of legislation that's being debated as we speak. However, they are not yet a requirement to access the $800 million in groundwater funding. The Delta plan does recommend that groundwater management plans be required for certain areas of the state that are in critical overdraft. However, language in the groundwater bills that are being debated might make this linkage in requiring that plans be adopted to access that funding. There's also language governing the way that the Delta Conservancy will spend its money regarding restoration projects. There's language that directs them to coordinate with cities and counties on those projects, which is similar to a regulation we have in the Delta Plan, DPP2. Other funding of interest in the water bond, I mentioned $50 million for the Delta Conservancy for restoration activities. There's also $87.5 million for other Delta restoration that will be overseen by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And that includes funding, although it does not articulate an amount, for the Delta Science Program. In addition, there are multiple funding pots that can help achieve the state's policy of reduced reliance, depending on the way they're expended, or at least increased regional self-reliance, and that's under the categories of integrated regional water management, groundwater remediation, and stormwater management. Notably, there's $295 million in funding for flood management projects in the Delta out of a total flood management pot of $395 million. So the Delta did quite well there. Back on the topic of groundwater legislation, there was activity earlier this week in that the Senate passed a major hurdle by agreeing on an assembly version of a two-part bill package. That needs to go back to the assembly for concurrence. That vote has not been scheduled yet, as far as I know. I was trying to check this afternoon. And the Senate bill, which is linked, both contain language that means that one cannot pass unless both pass. The Senate bill has not yet been taken up. The end of session is August 31st, which is this Sunday. So you might expect that discussions will continue up until essentially midnight on Sunday. With that, we have no legal update today, so I will hand it back to Chairman Fiorini.
Any questions of Jessica? Great report. Thank you very much. It's been a busy month for our Delta Stewardship Council staff. The next item, file item 5, lead scientist report, Dr. Peter Goodwin.
Thank you. Change the system. Well, thank you, Chair Fiorini, and good afternoon, everyone. It's certainly great to be in the Delta. And also, just on behalf of the Delta Science community, I'd like to welcome Mayor Brown. We are absolutely delighted with your appointment, with your long history and interest in science, and of course in your own city, the outreach programs you do for K through 12. So welcome on behalf of the science community, and we look forward to working with you in the coming years. Perhaps just as a sort of a very brief overview, we know that the mayor has just arrived. But many of the things I'll be touching on in the lead scientist report is, you really captures, I think, the role of the science program in that we are here to facilitate science. We don't actually do it. And under the science plan, the One Delta, One Science, our goal is to try and build a common body of knowledge that everybody can share, your common tools. And we're tasked with developing the highest caliber science, also communicating that science, and being in a facility like this, what better way to communicate? And you'll also hear later on that often our role is described as being the honest broker. So both in federal and state law, there's this thing called best available science, which scientists really don't like, but we have to define it somehow. And part of that is things like your peer review, which I'll be mentioning in one of the later items. So in science, there's really a lot of happening right now, several new initiatives, and I'd also really like to pick up on Jessica's comment a moment ago. I think that the staff that we have in place right now and their dedication is absolutely remarkable. And there's so many things being balanced right now. We get requests. We try and be very responsive and nimble to these activities, whether it's providing information or more substantive roles. So I'd just like to acknowledge the staff who've changed vacation plans. Gosh, there were even meetings yesterday evening, so terrific job. So just a couple of the things which aren't on the list. I just wanted to assure you that the interim science action agenda for Mayor Brown, this is the work plan. We're trying to synthesize the various science priorities across the various agencies and organizations in the Delta. And at the same time, we're in the midst of the State of Bay Delta Science. And yesterday we had a meeting of the editorial board. And one of the things under your direction from the council, we really want these things to be linked at the hip. So the science action agenda is describing what are the research priorities, what's being done, and then on a cycle, that scientific review gets summarized, synthesized, and included in the State of Bay Delta Science. And there's some very, very innovative ideas how we're going to both produce and make the State of Bay Delta Science accessible. Another of the things which is ongoing is the Big Data Summit, which we held. If you recall, that was just a remarkably successful event. More than 1,300 people participating online from 8 different countries, and we really didn't even advertise that. I'd also like to acknowledge Dr. Hale at SFEI and George Isaac in the science program in the way they're putting this document together with many different authors is quite remarkable. It's very, very high tech how different writers and authors can see what other people are contributing almost real time. And this is just for the authors themselves, but as changes are made or things are updated, there's just a complete record so the authors aren't writing over the top of each other. And I think this technology is really quite something. The last thing I'll mention before I get on to the real listed items here was the earthquake in Napa. And just a few comments, and here I'd like to acknowledge, I see Mr. Paul Helliker is in the audience, so if you don't mind, Mr. Helliker, I'll just mention some of the discussion from you and Gail Newton when we had an offline chat about that yesterday. Clearly, there's a lot of concern about this for many reasons. One, the earthquake was close to the delta. From what the preliminary measurements are showing is that the actual ground accelerations under the delta were considerably less than the levels that would be required for liquefaction or slump failure and things like that. So unless things have changed, there's been no current reports of any failures or severe damage within the delta itself. Also, when we were up in Idaho and following those initial reports, I think the initial reports were saying that fault line that the earthquake was located on appeared to be inactive, but I think that's been updated now to be part of the Yountville fault line that also failed about 10 years ago. So activities are clearly ongoing. Is there likely to be a consequence between that and some of the other faults which could affect the delta? And I thought I would just remind you that you are funding 2 science fellows on this topic, one at UCLA that's actually looking at the settlement mechanisms associated with seismic response. And the second science fellow that you're currently supporting is a collaboration between the USGS and Stanford University that's actually looking at modeling the effects of the faults under the delta. So I'm sure both of those groups will be looking closely at the Napa earthquake. So the 3 items which are described, I'll just touch on this very briefly, and if you have any questions, I'll be very willing to elaborate. And on this first item, I do want to emphasize that clearly the science program and the council is focused on the delta, its connections to the bay and the watershed. But if you recall, when we were developing the science program itself, you had encouraged us what's going on elsewhere, either nationally or internationally. And we had reached out across most of the large-scale ecosystem programs in the country. How are you doing things? And that actually guided how the science plan was put together. Also, based on some of your suggestions, is that was the initial input to the science plan. But clearly there's much to be learned from other areas. The chair of our independent science board has just stepped down from the lead scientist position at Puget Sound, and there was very, very close links between those 2 programs. Also in the state of Louisiana with their coastal restoration program. But there's other innovations going on literally across the world, whether it's technologies, whether it's how you get folks to work together, how you build community models, how you update things. And we're very interested to learn from that, but also we have a responsibility when we have things working well here, when we have technologies, either through our online journal or through other activities, we certainly want to make that knowledge available to other groups. So this item here came up at fairly late notice, cyber infrastructure and water resources in the lower Mekong region. This was an exploratory workshop partially supported by the National Science Foundation. And if you recall in the Data Summit, there were several of our plenary speakers were intimately involved with that program. And then Vice Chair Eisenberg and I actually had an opportunity to address the EXCEED, which is the big data, big science community. And so for this activity, first of all, I should just define cyber infrastructure by the National Science Foundation. This is everything related from big data, from modeling to monitoring technologies, to visualization, virtualization, to communication online. All of these and several other things appear under their definition of cyber infrastructure. And so they held this workshop in the Mekong because in terms of transboundary water issues, this is one of the really hotspots in the world right now. So Tracy Collier as chair of the Independent Science Board, and they also asked for a young scientist to accompany, and so Lindsay Correa from our staff went. And I think by all accounts she was just, what was the term, Jessica? Rockstar. Where she was putting out the One Delta, One Science concept, how you get all of the agencies that you're facing with working together. So it will be very interesting to see the white paper that comes out of that workshop and where the National Science Foundation chooses to take that in the future. So while that was going on, I thought I would also say last week I was at the what's called the Hydroinformatics Conference. It's an international conference. Informatics, of course, is information technology, and hydro is related to water. And this group has been around since the early 1990s, and it's part of a much larger international organization that has existed since the 1930s. And what was very interesting there, I was actually there for my university, and we were presenting a project on integrated modeling that we've been doing for reclamation. But what was reaffirming in that is that many of the plenary speakers were either direct representatives from the President Obama's initiative on big data, people like Dr. Dave Maidment from the University of Texas, and also some of the international efforts on how we share data, how we build these data efforts. And it made me convinced that we are absolutely on track with the development of our white paper on big data in the future. So it was an opportunity to get several of the key folks there to invite them to review our white paper as it's developed. So that's trying to develop international connections. And just as one other thought on how we're moving ahead, it's very easy to have students and to have academics moving around the world to international conferences to participate in other large-scale environmental restoration activities. What's a lot harder, but if you can do it is much more effective, is to try and stimulate the exchanges between elected officials, staffers of those people, people within agencies and managers. Because if you're trying to make a difference, say, in Patagonia or the Mekong, it's actually that exchange between agency folks where the differences really happen. So I'll keep you informed how these efforts you are going. There is a couple of initiatives through the United Nations and a consortium of professional organizations, including the parent group of Hydroinformatics, to try and put together an international program that would include activities such as here in the Delta. Are there any questions on that? Any thoughts? Okay, the next thing, and I'm not sure if this was for the council, I guess it is, because the council, it might also be a reminder to Chairman Fiorini and I that our abstracts are due, but we just wanted to keep you informed that the Bay Delta Science Conference is coming up in October. And Mayor Brown, we certainly hope you'll be able to attend. This is a very significant conference. There'll be well over 1,000 people there. It deals everything from K through 12 education to the cutting edge of the science and monitoring and data management. It's just a great way to interact. So that's just a reminder, and the council meeting will be, I don't know, Jessica, if you want to... That's
right. We've arranged the council meeting to be, I believe, on the Thursday of the conference at the conference site, so to facilitate council members' attendance.
How do you sign up?
Contact staff. Elaine will sign you up. I should say that next month we're also going to be featuring more of a preview of the events that will occur at the conference. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, Judge.
I know you've completed your thoughts, or at least a report, with respect to these internationalization of, in terms of exchange of ideas with scientists, policymakers, whatever. Do you think that there's is that just beginning? Are we going to talk more about that that aspect of your report? Because I think that there's, I know that we've talked about it, and is there any way we can maybe expand upon that, where maybe this Delta can become a focal point of some new thinking on how we deal with the problems that we share with the other places throughout the world, such as the Delta we have here.
Yeah, I think that would be an excellent idea. Right now, I think the discussions that are going on, particularly with this group, with interest from the United Nations, is what would this look like? What are the potential funding mechanisms? How do you actually affect that? And what I would suggest is when some of those ideas are actually written down into something, it would be worth taking a look at to see if is this something that we want to be engaged in. Certainly the European Union, United Nations are likely to participate. Things are just a little difficult right now in the US, just because of the fairly limited funding to get US participation. So I would say if this is something that interests you, we'll certainly keep you informed and updated. And when opportunities like this came where we get a sudden short-term invitation to the Mekong, I think that may be the opportunity to lay out our ideas a little more clearly. The next item here is your update on El Nino, and I won't spend too much time on this right now. You had asked just for a regular update. There really isn't too much to report from last time. If you recall, it looked like in February, March that we were setting up to have one of the biggest El Ninos. Certainly the warm water that drives this process was the largest spatial extent ever recorded. Over time, that's been dissipating steadily. And so now the signal that we're seeing from the changing ocean temperatures is really not sufficient to drive the models to be conclusive one way or another. So if you go on the NOAA climate change, it will say there's about an equal chance of it being above normal, or below normal year this next year. And that's just a function of it being very weak forcing. If the water was very warm and the models could begin to capture that. So as we get closer to the fall, those models are likely to increase their accuracy. So we'll keep you updated on that. Yeah. Councilman Ustala said the Farmer's Almanac is probably the best and most reliable right now. Yeah, absolutely. Before I go to the last item, I just wanted to mention that the science program received a request about a month ago from Secretary John Laird, David Murillo, who's the Regional Director of the Bureau of Reclamation, Ren Lehofner, who's the Regional Director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Will Stell, who's the Regional Administrator of NOAA Fisheries. And what this letter was asking us to do was to think about convening a workshop, which we do. So sometimes we're asked to do synthesis type workshops. Can you pull together the available information and put it in an understandable brief form? And so this letter was asking us, if I'll just paraphrase here, you have a copy of the letter in your package. For those of you who are in the meeting, there's hard copies outside. And this was asking us to take a look to summarize the what is actually known about this, what we call the stresses on the delta, how they might interact, and the overall risks. And so we've been working, Senator Laird, you allocated this task to Carla Namath, and we've been coordinating with her as how we would put this workshop together. And so we'll keep you updated on this. The guidelines for this workshop appear in, I think it's Appendix H in the Delta Science Plan. So we just want to let you know that's happening. Of course, very, very important, and we're going to be responsive to this activity. Are there any thoughts or questions?
Questions for Dr. Goodwin? Please proceed.
Okay, my last item, and this is with a great tinge of sadness on one half, but on one side, and on the other side, I think it's an example of a great success. So, Mei Ling, if you'd like to come down. I'd just like to re-emphasize and thank you, the council members, for the leadership in the State Fellows and Science Fellows programs. I think that universally this is recognized as one of the most influential and successful programs which you run. And the council should take a lot of pride that you really are the cornerstone of the fellows programs. And this is a way that it gets the very best talented young scientists engaged in Delta issues. And so they will come in, they'll work for a while. Many of them will stay working in the area. Some will go to academic jobs or out of the area. But invariably, these science fellows stay engaged, whether it's sitting on review panels, you're coming back to give advice throughout their careers. And so, Mei Ling Rodham, this is going to be her last council meeting. She has made many, many contributions to the science program, and I would have asked Sam Harada to be here, who I think had the honor of trying to supervise you, Mei Ling, during the last few months. But Sam just told me to say that Mei Ling has made many, many contributions to the science program. And you obviously have seen her through the by the numbers. When we were developing the science plan, we had naturally assumed that that would go viral. It absolutely did not. But the rap video that Mei Ling was the co-author of did go viral. And so we're very appreciative of what you did with that. And it's humorous, but it really touched a lot of young folks, particularly at the Science Day at the State Capitol. So she's made many, many contributions. And Sam just wanted to acknowledge that in the CAMPT process, Mei Ling has been one of our assigned scientists working on the salmon synthesis team. And unfortunately, she did such a terrific job with that the National Marine Fisheries Service has offered her a job. So this is, I think, an example of the great success of this program, but of course from the science program and from the council, you're going to be greatly missed. So before we actually let you speak the numbers, I think that Chairman Fiorini, if I could pass this back to you, and if Eric, if you have a camera somewhere in the audience. Is Eric around? Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Mei Ling, it's my pleasure on behalf of the science staff to present you with the commemoration of your services here. This is a picture reflecting the work you did for your rap video in advertising the interim science action agenda. We won't ask you to perform it here without your partner, but congratulations. Thank you for your service.
So, for the final time, Mei Ling Rodham with the by the numbers.
Thank you. I was not expecting that at all. Well, I guess I'll just dive right in as usual. In terms of water storage, reservoir levels are still low and still steadily dropping. Delta operations, pumping at the Jones pumping plant has decreased slightly since the beginning of this month. And then in terms of river flow, Sacramento and San Joaquin river flows have decreased slightly since the beginning of this month as well. And then for fish, the 2014 Summer Townet Survey for age 0 striped bass, the abundance index is 0.3, which ties with 2007 for the lowest on record and is half of the index for 2013. And then for water quality, the electrical conductivity for these locations has been holding relatively steady for the past couple of months. And that's pretty much all I have for you guys. Yes.
I just have one question. When you look at the map and the electrical conductivity, you've got Hood, which is green, then Rio Vista goes yellow, and then the next one is red.
Mhm.
But if you look on and that's on the Sacramento. Now, if you look on the San Joaquin, you see that kind of same yellow to red. But you would expect the San Joaquin, which gets almost no water, to be horrible. But actually, it's the one on the Sacramento that is terrible by orders of magnitude that just jumped out at me. And you know what I'm saying is Hood has green, then it goes to Rio Vista yellow, which is, and then it falls off the cliff just a few miles down the Sacramento River. But it doesn't do the same kind of thing on the San Joaquin, which you would expect to be the worst river, since there's little or no good water, blah, whatever. So, inquiring minds want to know why that is. And where is X2 now? That would be a fun thing to have on this map, especially as it approaches, like, Sacramento.
Yeah. Well, once X2 reaches past, I believe it's Edmonton, around that area.
It's got to be above it, up towards Rio Vista now, I would think.
It's around there. After that, they just say it's over 82 kilometers and don't really give any specifics in terms of kilometers. And then in terms of the color of the dots, they're slightly subjective, but still based on kind of...
But I was looking at the numbers.
Yeah.
If you look at the numbers, you go from, like, if the drinking water standard's around 900, I would say that you don't need to salt your food at Jersey Point. But at Edmonton, you're probably going to have a high blood pressure.
Yes, well, luckily the pumping plants aren't located there, as far as I know.
Yeah. And I think what you're seeing there actually is it's not an artifact, it's just a process of how the water circulation happens in that area. So the very...
I'd say it's not circulating. It's pretty crappy.
Well, actually, but at Edmonton, this is a measure of the salinity. So you would expect the salinity to go up as you get further and closer to the Bay and the Golden Gate Bridge. So Edmonton has the highest salinity under that.
And what's protecting Jersey Point is that the tide doesn't equally kind of flow through there because it's constricted.
Right, yeah.
Dutch Slough and all that stuff? Okay.
Yes. Any other questions?
Mei Ling, you have been the one person that has reported to us consistently that generates questions. So thank you for the good work that you've done by the numbers.
This is a map and a picture. See, I don't deal well with numbers and words, but pictures I'm okay on.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I've truly enjoyed my time working for the Delta Science Program, Delta Stewardship Council.
Thank you, and best wishes with NEMS.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item, file item 6, is an action item. It is the adoption of the July 25th, 2014 meeting summary. What is the council's pleasure? Eisenberg moves. And Demrell seconds. Any discussion? Beginning to my left.
Aye.
Eisenberg, aye.
Fiorini, aye.
Abstain.
Tatiana,
Because I wasn't
aye.
here.
Johnston, aye.
Okay, we have one abstention because Mayor Brown was not here. Motion passes. Thank you very much. File item 7. This is a very great moment. And Cindy Messer, I believe, is lead staff person on this, or shall Jessica carry it?
Jessica's going to take the lead today on this.
Great.
This is her handiwork.
Well, appropriately so. So file item 7 is council endorsement of the habitat issue paper that Jessica Davenport has spent a lot of time working on. So Jessica, Lauren Hastings, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Fiorini and council members. We're very pleased to be here today. And the action item before you is that we will be requesting the council's endorsement of the habitat restoration issue paper. But before we request your endorsement, I wanted to say a few words about it. I also wanted to acknowledge one more person who helped with the tour this morning, and that is Megan Brooks, who's been interning with us for about 6 months now. And going back to the paper, the Independent Science Board's review was really the triggering incident for this process that we went through with drafting the paper. So the Independent Science Board conducted a review of habitat restoration programs in the Delta and presented that to you last July. At that time, we also had several folks representing different levels of habitat restoration from projects to programs present. Following up, we had a bit of a progress report last November, and then this original draft of this paper we presented to you in January. Now, since that time, we've gotten a lot of comments back from agency and stakeholder partners, and I want to thank everyone who provided comments on the paper that led to today's draft. So since we are at a new stage, I wanted to mention a few things that are more or less consistent since the January draft. And one of those things is the need for balance in restoration projects. We know that we need the best available science, but we also need to make sure we don't have paralysis by analysis. And that's why we require adaptive management. So another point is to have realistic expectations about habitat restoration. We all know that we're not going to take the Delta back to the way it was. So we have to understand what the system is now and what the potential is to enhance it to benefit the species and habitats that we care about. We also are continuing to emphasize the importance of a landscape scale perspective when doing habitat restoration, and the importance of tracking and reporting on our progress and making that information available to the public. We're also emphasizing the importance of stakeholder involvement and interagency coordination. So what has changed since the January draft? One of the main things is we are acknowledging the important progress that's been made so far by a lot of different groups working on habitat restoration. The Fish Restoration Program, partnership between the Department of Water Resources and the Department of Fish and Wildlife, has released their annual report, although it actually covers the first 4 years of the program. They have the Interagency Ecological Program has started a tidal marsh monitoring work group to develop monitoring protocols that will help us with adaptive management. There's productive collaboration in the YOLO bypass. There's an agriculture and land stewardship work group that's been developing good neighbor policies that are currently being vetted with the agricultural community and other Delta stakeholders. And under the Delta Restoration Network, which has been convened by the Delta Conservancy, there is a land management work group that is promoting discussion about different approaches to land management, acquisition, long-term management issues, and that's still a major challenge in the Delta. And then finally, there's a section of the paper about the science plan, the Delta Science Plan that was adopted in December, and throughout the paper we look at how do we put the science plan into action, and Lauren's going to talk about that a little bit more later, including the hub proposal. And another important aspect of the science plan and just science coordination in general is helping with permit coordination, because one of the things we heard is that, well, as those of you who were able to come on the morning portion, the field trip, saw today, there's sort of this spiral that goes on with projects as they're proposed, and they go through different agency reviews and have to be continually revised, and it takes a really long time. So there's been some discussion about how bringing all the important regulatory agencies and scientists together at the early stages of project design can help accelerate that process. So another really important element of revising this paper was to focus in on the role of council staff. And I'm going to first talk a little bit about the role of the planning division, and then Lauren will talk about the science program's role. So on the planning division side, one of the areas that we are interested in focusing on is the early consultation with respect to covered actions under the Delta Plan for habitat projects. Also, we have our commitment to the performance measures process, and as part of that, we will be coordinating with other agencies on tracking habitat restoration. So, Lauren, would you like to speak about the science programs areas?
Sure. With all of this, with the helping to implement the Delta Plan and the Delta Science Plan, our focus is on best available science and adaptive management. And so we coordinate very closely with Jessica and other staff in the planning unit on many of these activities, helping with the early consultation efforts, and with coordination with many other groups out there that are doing a lot of this work. You know, it's part of our motto of One Delta, One Science. We do a lot of coordination with other groups and are continuing to work with them on these efforts. Didn't know if you want me to give more detail or...
Yeah, maybe talk about some of the specific actions that we've identified.
So one of the things that's in the Delta Plan and is consistent with the Delta Science Plan is this landscape perspective that Jessica mentioned, and part of that is coming up with what we're now calling landscape visions, or the Delta Plan we call them landscape scale conceptual models. So the idea is that we want to help project proponents develop their individual restoration projects within this landscape context, so that they're not just focused on their own project, but thinking bigger picture. And that's one of the areas that we think we can help with, and we're working to implement these aspects, currently working with folks involved in the restoration network and the development of this restoration hub concept, and seeing it as that being a venue for implementing this.
Great. And just to run through, at the end of the paper and also in your staff report, we do have a list of areas of focus for the next 2 years for the council staff, and then also actions of other agencies and stakeholders that they have committed to through their own processes. And so one of the things that we wanted to suggest today was, if the council endorses this paper, we would transmit it back to the ISB, the Independent Science Board. We would also share it with our agency and stakeholder partners. And if Chair Fiorini would like to, we will also share it with the Delta Plan Implementation Committee. So that's our report.
Questions?
On page 19.
19?
The microphone
Is that right?
button.
19. Actions of other agencies.
Patrick, the button. We have a new, it's no longer red button down, it's red light on.
Okay, well, I can learn that. Thank you. Actions of other agencies and stakeholders, you referenced, Jessica.
Yes.
So number 4 is address top 3 Delta community stakeholder concerns. And that's a reference to the bottom of page 15, I think, right?
Yes.
And those, it says the Delta Dialogue stakeholders expressed interest in continuing to meet to address 3 issues: an inventory of public lands and lands purchased with public funds for habitat restoration, a map of overlapping habitat areas, and what you refer to as good neighbor policies, including funding for long-term operations and maintenance. What does address mean?
Well, and unfortunately, Campbell Ingram from the Delta Conservancy couldn't be here today. He had jury duty. He's the leader of that effort. And I have attended one of their meetings, not the specific one where they came up with these 3 objectives, but from what I understand from talking with Campbell. And I know there's going to be a meeting tomorrow where they've already started to pull together some of this information that's been requested. There'll be more discussion of those. And as I mentioned earlier, there have been some good neighbor policies drafted that require further vetting. So I think the way that it will be addressed is to have discussions, and based on what comes out of these discussions, they'll decide what the next steps will be.
I see on 3 good neighbor policies, that would take discussion and some consensus building, and that certainly takes some process. The other 2 strike me as tasks that require the gathering of information and seem pretty straightforward and potentially helpful to everybody, including the council.
Yeah.
So are those, is there some reason it doesn't say they're going to do it? They're just going to address it?
Oh, I think they pretty much have done. I know they've at least in draft form created those products for the upcoming meeting tomorrow. So I'm sure once it goes through some kind of vetting process, it could be released to the council as well. Okay. So I can ask them for that.
Susan?
Thanks, Jessica, for all your hard work on this paper, and Lauren. I have a question on the council staff actions item 4, and it's probably because I haven't been participating since January. And like Larry, pictures help me quite a bit also, and I'm wondering, earlier you said that the hub, the restoration hub would accelerate permitting, if I understood correctly. Is that, so I guess what I'm asking is if I have it correct, there are at least 3 parts to the restoration hub. And I'm wondering if the recommendation on item 4, which part of the hub is that?
Susan, could you read
Sure,
council
yeah.
action 4?
Council staff action item 4, convene scientific experts to provide independent review of restoration project designs and adaptive management plans within a landscape context.
Sure, I can handle that one. Basically, the 3 parts of the hub that you're referring to, the first part is really just pulling together the GIS-based and modeling-based tools that are available now, putting them into a common, accessible location, and making sure that we can provide them to all project proponents that are doing habitat restoration. The second component is working to provide these landscape scale conceptual models, or what we're kind of now calling landscape visions, where we're really focusing on the efforts that SFAI launched with historical ecology and really translating the historical ecology to today's landscape, and laying those on top of each other. So seeing what was, seeing what is today, and then what's possible by kind of merging those together and using the tools in the first suite of tools, putting that all together into these landscape scale visions that we're intending will provide the guidance to project proponents and will provide that landscape context that we feel is really important. The third part is building on those first 2 and pulling together additional decision support tools that will utilize the part, what we develop in parts 1 and 2, and also will bring in science experts to work directly with project proponents, so to provide the space and the opportunity for project proponents to work with scientists, to work with these tools, and really to put it all together so that they can come up with designs that are based on the best available science, that consider adaptive management, that consider the landscape perspective, that consider the neighbors. So we're also hoping that that provides this venue for interacting with the locals, you know, that where folks can come and see in a transparent way what's being discussed and what's being thought about. And so when your question on number 4 is, that's where that would fit in. I think that's the place we're envisioning experts coming in to work with both project proponents, to work with landowners and adjacent neighbors to put this all together.
And the regulatory agencies.
And thank you. And so one of the other things we're thinking about in the hub is we're really working toward this vision, but there are attributes of it that we think we can probably get started with now. And one of those that we could get started with now, we think, is to go, that has been actually utilized on a couple of projects, Prospect Island and Lower Yolo, is bringing in science experts now to help with the development of science-based restoration designs.
Page 3-5.
Other questions, comments?
Yeah.
Phil?
Just a suggestion to help clarify it. I'm following up on what Mr. Johnston was talking about. It is likely that the council issue paper will become a reference point in the future. That's the goal that you're seeking. And so it has to be useful to project applicants, agencies, individuals, but also understandable to us. One of the things that struck me, and it's in the introduction of the Delta Plan on guidance from Delta Plan and other relevant plans, is the world seems to start when we adopted the Delta Plan, when in fact the legislature mandated specific environmental conditions that must be included in the Delta Plan and are expected to be included in implementation actions. And I'm particularly looking at Water Code Section 85302. The Delta Plan shall further the so on and so forth. And if you don't reference the statute and the directions, but simply reference the Delta Plan sections that go with it, 3 minutes from now, somebody will believe that we made it up out of whole cloth as opposed to followed the legislative mandates. And I think in terms of an explanation of what's going on, tying back to the statutes are fundamentally important and not just a writing artifice. I think it is frankly elevates the importance. And it does also tend then, this is Mr. Johnston's question, is this kind of us just kibitzing on the side, or is this a discussion that also informs people with covered actions what things will be required to meet the provisions of the Delta Plan for a covered action? And I personally think that's what should be done. I think you have to leave it, you have to be more specific on the statute, and you have to be very clear that the function of the council is to exercise the authority given by the legislature and to apply these standards and these tests. And although there are many interpretations that could be given to it, the one that cannot be given is these are all discretionary steps which should be nice to take but have no other consequence. There are a lot of consequences. The other thing that that struck me, if I remember correctly, the first draft, we had a relatively high use of interconnected habitat, the phrase interconnected habitat. And I know we've got things that are, the functional corridors, which is a statutory language and so on. Interconnected habitat is a simpler way to talk about functional corridors. And it is one of the most complicated problems in restoration activities because the practical consequence of project-by-project planning is you never pay any attention except to what you have to do for a particular project. And the function here is to try to get, much like the discussion this morning when we were talking about the Contra Costa County Habitat Conservation Plan, get back, take a bigger perspective, and understand that scale, which you do emphasize, bigger is almost always better, not always, but almost always better in terms of qualitative measures. And that's only possible if there's a vision out there that transcends simply individual projects. So I commend you for your work. Is there anything that was left out of this last draft that gives you particular anguish?
No.
Okay. Because if there were. Thank you. Good work.
Phil, I have a question. In regards to the statute citations, you're not satisfied that the references to the water code on page 1 and 2 are adequate?
No, because people are going, and I'm just thinking about people who look at documents 2 years after they've been written with no particular background, but just seeking a reference point. And it's likely that Restoring Habitat with Science and Society in mind, a council issue paper might be one of those documents. And I think most of the readers would not really understand that there are, 40 pages of statutory language that led to the Delta Plan and the items included, and this structure references it. I mean, that's just me. And the caption, guidance from Delta Plan and other relevant plans, is something that jumps out in a piece of paper, and that's where people would assume the issue starts. But of course it isn't. It's from the statute.
But in the paragraph
Yep.
prior to that, it
Yep.
cites the water code sections.
Yeah. And that's in its coordinating role. But the covered action roles is not just, coordinating is a separate action from covered actions.
No, we
And-
can add a couple more citations
I mean, just
of the
think about the way to
appropriate parts that relate
explain
to
it. I think
habitat.
it
Yeah, we can.
strengthens
We can do
this
that.
to link it to the statute. Okay. Yeah, that's all. Thank you. Larry?
I have on.
Oh, I'm sorry,
No, no, no,
Asia.
no.
Okay,
Amir
go ahead.
Brown was
My
next.
question was answered by Lauren. Thank you.
All right, great, thanks.
On that,
Larry?
council staff actions 3 and 4, if they're to, I kind of put them together and my question is, when it says, work with others to complete at least one of the landscape scale conceptual models and associated landscape habitat metrics for the priority habitat restoration areas, and then it rope in the scientists to kind of help you with that. Are we doing a theoretical thing, or are we doing something that actually says, we're doing this on Dutch Slough or over in the marshes or up in YOLO? Because I think some of the thing that upsets the folks in the Delta is we stay very conceptual, or we say we're going to do this and we'll adaptively manage if it doesn't work. And they just want to know that if you've got all these projects working, how come we don't, get something out of those and then say this is how it works? Or we want to do this elsewhere because it worked here, here, and here, or we're not going to do this because it didn't work. So it goes back to one of my old things that I kind of beat on, and I'm sure Phil thinks it's my dead horse, but the folks in the Delta want to trust what's being done, and they will do that, I think, if they see action. And with the new bond, you do have some money going into the Conservancy. Now this is a chance for the Conservancy to prove itself. Give it some money, let it do something. If it screws up, then you don't give them any more money. If they do a good job, you could give them some more money. And I think that's what they're looking for, and maybe they're expecting the Stewardship Council to do, is to actually kind of stop talking and get actual things done. And there's enough state-owned land and projects in various stages. We saw Dutch Slough. We should be able to build on those to then make the case that trust us, we're from the government, we're here to help you.
I think that's one of the purposes of this paper. We have 6 high priority restoration areas. This is to drive pilot projects in each of those restoration areas. And,
So maybe I'm just
you're
emphasizing that.
You're spot on, but is it fair to say that is part of why this paper was drafted?
Yeah, and that's why we took the 2-year focus. And at the same time, we were looking as much as possible at the council staff's role, because we're not the ones on the ground, figuring out the engineering plans and such for the projects. We want to be supportive of those agencies that are doing that. And a big part of our role is science support. And then another big part of our role is the Delta as a place, and how can these projects work well for the communities by having recreational opportunities and things like that. So that's what this was trying to get at, is how can we be clear about what our role is. Of course, our regulatory role is very important, but also our coordination role is extremely important too, and identifying issues and getting people to talk to each other and agree on how they can move forward and how we can gain more support for overcoming some of these barriers that do slow down projects. So maybe Lauren might want to say, I mean, one of the things about the review experts, the panel of scientific experts to review projects, is it is intended to be quite practical. You know, you have projects, they're at a certain stage of design, you bring together regulatory agency staff, scientists, stakeholders, and we had an example of that in the Sassoon Marsh, where the project's at a very early stage, they were willing to come to a group, get input, and we felt that was very productive. So we don't have, you know, any years of data to prove that that's working yet. We just started that process, but Lauren might be able to say more about, there's been some specific examples in the past, like Prospect Island, where there have been scientific expert teams that have helped move a project forward in a practical way for a real restoration on the ground. It's not simply conceptual.
Right. Well, and there was kind of a lot to your question, but
I roam around a lot.
But
because I don't know what I'm going to say from one second to the next.
But anyway, I mean, I agree with Randy. I think what you're saying is exactly consistent with what we're trying to achieve here. We're basically trying to develop the tools, because this is something that, you know, speaking from the science program's perspective, help to develop the tools that practitioners will use to design their projects. And in part, these tools, I think, are also helpful because it allows for, one of the other tenets we have is transparency, and it allows for this transparency of what people are thinking, of what's planned, what is the bigger picture vision, so with what people are trying to do with habitat restoration, and providing venues for public involvement is another big part of what we're trying to do.
And I agree with all that. I guess I'm struck by the fact that the first place we went to visit had a butterfly, and they used to have several thousand. Then they had a series of fires, and every time they had a fire, they lost 50% of their population, or at least what they count. And if they're going to get that habitat all ready for that, and it's not going to be there anymore. So at a certain point, we need to take as good a plan as we have, and let's actually start saving a butterfly or a fish or whatever else there is. Otherwise, all we're doing is providing a lot of good jobs for, you know, guys that just got their PhD and stuff, and that's great. I don't have a problem with that, but I just like to get something done in a lifetime. I'm old. I know none of this will finish with me, but a lot of the other, you know, there are some young people still here. They're going to.
We would like to see projects get done, and we're hoping this paper will contribute to that.
Good.
Mayor Brown?
Well, first, I think that the landscape visions will be a very impactful tool just from the development perspective. Many times when you're developing a project, you go to a community and you really don't have an expectation of what they want to see or really what's applicable in that community. And then looking from an ecosystem perspective, I think that something that would be very very effective on a community basis is really to identify a conservation toolkit. I know that this report is really specific to projects, but projects linked to the entire community from an ecosystem perspective. And when we consider if there was just if we identified zones for the Delta and then identified what type of landscaping visions would be applicable to certain areas. And just for example, you know, cities, we're clustered together and we're just separated by boundaries, but we share ecosystems. And we're rolling out conservation programs throughout many communities, but we have to individually, in silos, create our own landscaping plans and identify for the communities which types of plantscapes and foliage will be actually applicable to the area. And so if there was something uniform and it even if it wasn't as robust as it, it could be, but if there were just certain species that were identified to be native to the area, and then put that together within a conservation toolkit for communities, I think that that would have a huge impact that local legislators could use to implement within their community, and it would be a huge cost savings because financially you would have to identify a landscape architect to be able to put that program together in an efficient manner. And many times cities plant trees that are not native to the area, and then 3 years later they're dead, and everyone's wondering what happened. We wasted $50,000 on trees. So I think that that would be really effective since we do have this wealth of knowledge here available at our fingertips to be able to share that and get that to as many communities, places, spaces, habitats, and especially communities as possible. But I thought that the report was very comprehensive, and I just thought this should be shared on an even larger level.
Thank you.
This is a process that's been underway for many months. I want to remind the council that the staff is requesting an endorsement of this issue paper from the council. If it is endorsed by the council, the staff will use the paper to focus its own work and encourage others to focus their work in key areas that will spark progress toward implementing habitat restoration portions of the Delta Plan over the next 2 years. That is the staff recommendation.
I'd like to move it, allowing the staff to make such non-substantive changes that reflect some of the input today.
Councilmember Johnston moves.
Second.
Councilmember Damrell seconds. Any discussion on the motion? All right. The vote.
Damrell, aye. Eisenberg, aye.
Fiorini, aye.
Asia Brown, aye.
Tatai and I.
Johnston, aye.
Congratulations, unanimous support for a job well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica and Lauren.
I want to acknowledge Jessica Pearson's leadership in helping to focus the work of the Stewardship Council. You'll recall at last month's meeting, she presented 5 areas that we were going to prioritize: habitat, land use, levees, the science action agenda, and flows. And what you've just seen is an example of that focused activity and interest, touching habitat, land use, and I guess levees as well in this paper. File item number 8 is a continuance of those kinds of focuses, and Cindy Messer is here to give us an update on the Delta Levee Investment Strategy Program. Okay.
Can't see if the red light is on here.
It's not.
Oh, I see. Got it now. Thanks. Well, yes, so thank you for the intro earlier as well to our Executive Director on update for our Delta Levee Investment Strategy. We will be obviously bringing these to you on a monthly basis. And in fact, today I'm actually going to team up with Dr. Goodwin, since the focus of the update this month is on the independent scientific review panel. And a lot of work has gone into coordinating, beginning to convene that panel. And so because the Delta Science Program undertakes this process, it's in the Delta Science Plan. This is, they have their procedures and process for doing this. The staff, under Dr. Goodwin's guidance, has been working very hard, along with my staff, to begin to pull this particular element together. As you'll recall, it's one of the tasks that's listed under the scope of work for the Delta Levee Investment Strategy. And I will say it's the independent scientific review is focused, just as a reminder, it's focused on the methodology portion of this project. So as we begin to pull together the information, the data, developing the methodology that will ultimately be teamed with our computer-based decision-making tool that in the end will generate the recommendations that the council makes in terms of state investments in Delta levees. So as mentioned earlier, we have a statutory requirement to use best available science. It's in the Delta Plan. It's in many of the documents and the efforts that we produce. And this is the process by which we bring that together with an inclusion in our Delta Levee investment strategy. So before I turn, actually, I think I may turn things over to Dr. Goodwin at this point after we've walked through a brief update, or I think you're going to walk us through a bit on the process, just to remind everybody of what that is, and the progress to date on the independent review panel. And then I will follow up with some updates on some of the other elements staff have been working on. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Cindy. Perhaps first of all we should just remind ourselves why we do this peer review. It's absolutely past of best available science, but there's also a very practical side of this. This is a very, very difficult project to undertake, and I think you've got a great consulting company to undertake that. But one of the practical sides of this peer review is to bring in I'll give the components in a moment, but an outside panel that have no vested interest, and to look at the approach. Where is this analysis very strong? Where is the tool working well? Are there areas in the tool that can be strengthened somewhat? And even if there are any weaknesses. So this peer review is going on not at the end of the project when it would almost be too late to do anything, but as the tool is getting towards the final development. So it really it gives you as the council some assurance of the quality of the tool, and our partners, the Department of Water Resources and the Delta Protection Commission, that the underpinnings behind this tool on which you're going to make your decisions is going to be solid. The second thing is that when we undertake these review panels, there's always an organizing committee or a planning committee that helps craft the charge to the panel. And there's several people in the room here I'd like to acknowledge. You, Paul Helliker and his staff, you, particularly Gail Newton and Dave Moraz at Department of Water Resources, Eric Vink. We've really appreciated your thoughts on how this should be put together. And of course, on the planning side, Cindy and Yu Chen and others. So what the planning committee actually does is several things. They develop a draft of the charge to the panel. So what do we actually want to get out of this review? Because if you leave it too open-ended, you don't quite know what's coming back. So this is the group that will see how the tool is tested, how it's going to be used, and can really give the questions that allows the panel to focus. The second thing that they do is to identify the technical areas that are needed to evaluate the tool. And once those areas have been developed, we decide how many panel members should be appointed. And then this planning committee also brainstorms ideas for people who could be qualified for the panel. And so in this we maintain a database of experts that have been used in the past, and the planning committee will also throw out many names. The responsibility of both the final approval of the charge and the panel rests with the lead scientist. And I just want to say how much we agonize over the panel membership, because this is obviously critical. And whether it's the independent science board themselves, whether it's these independent panels, we try and have a blend of people who really know what's going on. But that membership of the panel is never enough to overwhelm the outside expertise. So you want people that have in-depth knowledge about what's happening that can get those other panel members up to speed. So typically on these review panels, there's maybe one or two people who've been working in the past in some capacity on the Delta, but most of the other people are experts from outside. Just a couple of other things about this then. When we look at those names, we do many things. We look for conflict of interest. We look for who these various experts have worked for. We try and be very representative. We wouldn't want an entire panel, for example, in this case, that had only ever done research for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, or everyone's worked for your NGOs. We really want the balance to bring different perspectives to that. And the other thing which the planning committee thought through very, very carefully is, we know this is going to be contentious. And I think that in this particular case, a lot of effort was put in the list of names we had on really bringing in an outstanding member, your panel members. So the quality of the people that we're talking to have all been absolutely outstanding. So just to get down to some of the specifics, the planning committee identified several areas. One was the geotechnical seismic area. The second area was in economics. We then wanted someone who's an expert on the human social issues, particularly that you would understand the perspective of the people living in the Delta that will be affected by this. So we wanted someone with very deep background there. We also wanted to bring in someone that understood on this totally interdisciplinary approach and the tool that's being pulled together. We wanted some experience on how you draw together very diverse information from different disciplines and package it in a way that is transparent and understandable. The next category that was identified by the planning committee was someone who was an expert in risk management. Then someone who's an expert in environment, and particularly environmental changes associated with land use change. So someone that really understood landscape ecology perspectives and how that may focus down onto some of the species in the Delta. And the last area, it was in the area of flood management, hydrology, climate change, and particularly how that affects flooding. So one of the challenges that we have in the science program is you start going down through the list looking at various areas. You're trying to maintain this balance, so you can't just put out 7 invitations for each of those areas simultaneously if you want to maintain that balance. So we tend to go through that sequentially. That can often take time. So we're almost at the conclusion of that, but we do have the chair of this panel confirmed. And in the meeting we had with the planning committee, in the area of geotechnical and seismic, there was one name that came up and just everyone said, well, if there's any chance of getting him, just go for it. And so we can certainly say the chair of the panel is Professor Jim Mitchell, who for many years was at the University of California, Berkeley. He was the department chair. I think he was even dean for the time, distinguished professor. He then moved to the Virginia Tech, where he was a professor, so he's been out of California for a little while. But his area, of course, is geotechnical seismic area, so he's bringing it great in-depth, member of the National Academy of Engineering, etc., etc. But really a giant in the field. So that's where we sit right now, and I don't know if there's anything else to say, and Paul or Eric, did that capture where we are right now? Okay, thanks.
Great.
Did I miss anything, Cindy, please?
Nope.
And if I do.
That's great.
So this is an informational item. Does anyone have any questions of Cindy or Peter?
This is a question to both of you. The guidelines for independent scientific review, which you've attached to this item called Appendix 1, I guess it is, under charge to the panel, the first paragraph explains that policies prescriptions will not be made by the panelists, that instead this will be technical or analytical. I mean, I don't want to beat a dead, I will beat a dead horse again. It is the absence of clear policy preferences in law on who is responsible or not responsible and who will pay or not pay for delta levies that brings us to the duty given us by the legislature. And I look forward to our white paper coming at our next meeting, I'm told, that will provide the definitive guidelines, not the questions to be answered, but the guidelines. I mean, this may be a complaint that we are starting the technical discussion of a scientific panel prior to the council staff or the council actually adopting a series of principles that will guide the activity. I mean, I don't, the order escapes me. It doesn't work. Number two, bringing together a group of people of the level of Dr. Mitchell and not asking for his comments on policy prescriptions and levies is nuts. I mean, he's one of the biggest names in the field. I found his CV on the web last week, and I mean, you know, you could read for 3 weeks and not get through his CVs of public. I mean, it seems to me the questions of what are you know, the basic fundamental questions of levies are the questions of who's responsible for what, at what point are individuals responsible for their own protection, at what level does government responsibility come in, and who's willing to pay for it, are necessary conclusions before you get technical analyses of methodologies to apply the principles. Tell me, maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I don't think we're asking the scientific review panel to tell us what to do. We're asking them to give us guidance on whether the approach that we're taking is accurate and consistent and has a basis, you know, is supported.
Well, see, I could imagine you could give, if we had a policy recommended framework, and after all, this is we're supposed to do an investment strategy, a recommended investment strategy for the legislature. That's what we were asked in statute to do. And it's got 5 or 6 or 7 different principles, whatever they are. But it's those choices that are at the heart of the issue. And so if you would want a group of people, scientists, to come in, you'd hand them the adopted principles you are considering and ask them to critique them in a, I don't know, policy preference, technique, I don't really care. You can't define their scope of activity when we have not yet defined the principles we are going to probably recommend to the legislature. Seems to me.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, actually, go ahead.
This will not completely address your question, but I will say one thing is to keep in mind the timing. And I didn't mention that in my introduction, but we will be convening this review panel, and they will begin their work in spring of next year. So we will have our white paper done. We will have had discussions around that white paper. It will be information we will be able to provide to the technical review panel. So just something, you know, we will have some of that information discussed, developed. We can provide that to them for framework in terms of the policy principles. But again, you know, we have a very specific ask of this panel, which is around the methodology and the inputs to that. But I do understand that they, you know, to bring those two together makes a whole lot of sense, and I would offer that.
In order to lock down the caliber of the people that you have to start now.
We do. It's the save the date game, frankly, of trying to get the right people and getting their time set aside when we need it. Is why we have to start so early.
And clarify for the council, this appendix is not specific to the Delta investment strategy. It is our policy for the way we utilize peer review science.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Jessica or Peter, you have a comment?
Perhaps just to add that, so what this review is doing, this is reviewing the science that will inform policy. I'm not sure with these scientists we can have, they're going to be willing to pass judgment where there's a lot of values associated with it. So this is the tool that will allow a policy to be enacted, but this is all going to be about your flood risks, risk of levee failure, how are areas going to be impacted by sea level rise in the long term. So it's actually the tools and the science that's going into those decisions that is being reviewed, which is what's referred to as the tool.
Mm-hmm.
Larry?
We have, and Eric's in the audience, and he can kind of correct me when I get totally in the weeds here, but we have, at Delta Protection, we're supposed to figure out who's going to pay for it. So we may have these grand, again, I get back to, we have these grand kind of ideas and plans, but we got to get down eventually to fixing the levees, which ones, who's going to pay for it, because there are a lot of folks that ride free on this particular deal in the Delta, and we need to basically, if we're going to have a system-wide fix, it's going to take everybody, in effect, every beneficiary paying their fair share. And I'm for getting to, let's cut through all this stuff and get down to where we should be, which is, here are the levies, we know where they are, some are good, some are not good, who needs to pay in, and how do we get, and then let's start turning some dirt. Because we can have a great plan, but if El Nino comes whipping through here and fools us all, we could be going from drought to flood. My joke is that those checks that the federal government's going to be sending to help the farmers and all out for their drought are going to arrive just as the flood arrives, and they're going to ask, can we use this to protect ourselves from the flood? And we'll say, absolutely not. That's drought protection.
Larry made reference to the work that the Delta Protection Commission is doing in terms of establishing potentially a levee assessment district in the Delta. So it would be looked upon as a funding mechanism, and our work is to help recommend how to prioritize state money that is going to be invested in Delta levees. They're parallel in products, but they will intersect at some point. One of the things that I recently learned about conflict management is that sometimes to initiate something that is very hard and potentially unpopular leads to some scars and some real difficulty. And this is going to be a difficult project, and that's why Jessica has promised to bring us monthly updates, because when there are decisions made as to where to invest money, it suggests that there are potentially areas that will be recommended not to invest money. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But it's a big project. It's long overdue in the Delta. And we are the ones that the legislature has asked to do it. So I've been following this closely. Our staff is doing a wonderful job. I agree with Dr. Goodwin. We have very competent consultants that are helping us with this. And Larry, to your point about getting it done as soon as possible, staff gets that. And it's scoped out as an 18-month to 24-month project, and they're doing everything they can to try and produce a very, very good product as soon as possible.
I'm just afraid Pat has already heard this, several iterations of this same type of planning, and we should do this, and the state should do this, or someone should do this. I know Phil's listened to this same argument several times. I just don't want it to go that we have a great report and everybody goes, yes, we should do this, and then it just stops.
Any other comments or questions? Cindy, thank you very much for the report. Peter, thank you very much for your work in setting up the science panel. And we look forward to getting a report soon of the full roster of scientists that you've identified. That concludes file item number 8. File item number 9, public comment. Do we have anyone that wishes to speak before the council on any matter that we've touched on today? If not, again, Mike Moran, way in the back, thank you for the opportunity to meet here. I want to reemphasize the opportunity to see the Delta model and the walkway to my right. Thank you all for coming. Meeting adjourned.
Berkeley tailgating.